And another prominent figure who's made it to the G20 summit is U.S. President Joe Biden. He did skip the ASEAN-related meetings earlier this week, but he's made sure to be present at the G20. Let's connect with Jessica Stone, a correspondent at Voice of America. Hello there, Jessica.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. We're getting a little bit of a reprieve from the Indian heat at the moment. I'm very grateful for that.
Nice. Jessica, how are things looking on day one of the G20 summit in New Delhi? Tell us.
Well, I can tell you one thing. This town is almost unrecognizable from its normal day-to-day activity. There's a complete lockdown in central Delhi, and the streets are all but clear of traffic. Lots and lots of security. It's a very secure event. But I did have a chance to run about for the last few days and see a big welcome sign for President Yoon Suk-yeol, a friendship building for the Korean and Indian alliance, and some welcoming signs as well, of course, for President Biden, a big screen just near the airport showing the last state visit of Prime Minister Modi to the United States. Really everywhere you go here in New Delhi, you see the smiling face of Prime Minister Modi talking about the G20. This is a huge event, of course, for the Indians as they try to put themselves forward on the global stage and become the voice of what they call the global South, the low-income countries that are members of the G20 as well and who need a greater voice in global finance, at least according to the Indian perspective. We will expect today for the U.S. to call for more finance going into the World Bank, the IMF, on the part of G20 countries, and they'll start with their own request to Congress of $3.3 billion to go to the World Bank. There's a greater call by Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who's also here in New Delhi, to really reform these institutions and help them better serve low-income countries, many of whom have fallen into hard times because they can barely afford to service the interest on their debt for loans that they have taken out for major infrastructure projects.
Right, Jessica, I cannot help but mention how Chinese leader Xi Jinping didn't make it to this year's G20. Now, is the summit this year an opportunity for U.S. President Joe Biden? What's up with that?
It certainly is being seen as such by White House officials. You know, they don't speak for China, but they sort of poke around a little bit with comments like, we believe in a transparent, non-coercive infrastructure funding development scheme. And, you know, there's also the sentiment that the Chinese have really missed an opportunity of their own not being at the G20, especially after Chinese President Xi Jinping saw fit to attend the BRICS Summit, really counter framework that he has joined with Brazil, Russia, and China and South Africa, as well as India. Western analysts note that both Brazil and India are here at the G20, as well as having been members of the BRICS Summit, and that they are able to be members of both frameworks, right? Having a voice is important to these countries in the greater context of the G20, but also in the context of BRICS. I think there's also a question here of the relevance of the G20, and the United States is seeing this G20 and its outreach to the global South as a way to keep it relevant in the face of so many needs in the African Union and elsewhere who have just been asked to join the G20 by India, and in fact did so today.
Right. I hear there's also a big deal that's about to be sealed. The U.S., India, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are looking to ink a railway deal that will connect the Middle East and India. What is that deal about?
Well, we expect to hear a formal announcement at 5 p.m. local time, which is about 2.5 hours from now. And that'll come during the evening events at the G20 event. We don't have all the details, but this seems to be a type of corridor, a trade corridor, the likes of which is already in existence in Africa, where we would see Middle Eastern countries linked by rail and then linked by ports to India. And this would be a joint investment project between India, the United States, Europe, and the Middle East in order to move energy, commerce, and data through this channel and create additional resilience in supply chains for these items, as well as give all of these countries more of an incentive economically to work more closely together. There's already been a memorandum of understanding under discussion, and we expect to see that signed at 5 p.m. local time. And then the negotiations really have to go forward in earnest. It's a tremendously ambitious project. We do not know how much it's going to cost, and it's not necessarily going to be able to rival the Belt and Road initiatives of China in terms of capitalization. But one thing the White House is clear about is that it is going to be a transparent, non-coercive alternative to the kind of finance deals that the BRI has put forward, particularly for the likes of Sri Lanka, which has spent 70% of its annual revenue just paying the interest on its debt and has had to declare bankruptcy after taking a loan from China.
All right, before I let you go, Jessica, Washington has also warned against a possible arms deal between North Korea and Russia, especially with reports saying that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is heading to Russia in the coming days. Now, Biden will probably send another round of stern messages to North Korea in New Delhi, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly very likely that we'll see some kind of counter-programming because you have the sort of sense of unity here in New Delhi around the G20. And so if we see a meeting even this week between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, you really have the optics of an isolated North Korea with an increasingly isolated Russia, and the very real reality that Washington has said that North Korea will pay a high price in the form of sanctions or leader-level talks. The U.S. is very concerned that this could bring Russia into a Taiwan contingency in particular. And so we do expect to hear some language from President Biden further discouraging North Korea from this type of lending of or selling of weapons to the Russians.
Definitely, Jessica. A busy day indeed ahead for all the leaders and you as well. Thank you for that report.
You bet. Good to see you.